You've heard of Vikings as fearless warriors, explorers, legends who carved their names into history. But that is only the story they wanted remembered. Because behind the sagas, behind the glory, there was something far darker. A truth buried beneath centuries of myth. A truth about what happened to the people they captured. Because for many, the worst part of a Viking raid was not dying. It was surviving. The raids often began without warning. A quiet village at dawn, mist hanging low over the fields, the distant sound of church bells, or waves crashing gently on the shore. Life felt ordinary, safe. Then came the ships. Long, narrow vessels cutting through the water, their dragon heads rising like shadows. The first people to see them often didn't understand what they were looking at. By the time they did, it was already too late. The Vikings moved fast. They had done this before. They knew exactly what they were looking for. They weren't just raiders. They were hunters. And the people in those villages were the prey. The attack was swift and brutal. Doors were kicked open. Families dragged into the streets. Anyone who resisted was cut down without hesitation. But killing was never the main objective. Not for everyone. Because the most valuable thing in that village was not gold. It was people. Strong men were seized first. Farmers, laborers, anyone with the strength to work. They were bound with ropes or chains, beaten if they resisted, and forced toward the ships. Some tried to fight back. They died where they stood. Others tried to run. They were hunted down. And for those who were captured, their nightmare had only just begun. Women were taken next. Not spared. Not protected. Taken. They were dragged away from burning homes, from crying children, from the bodies of loved ones. And in that moment, their lives were no longer their own. Children were not ignored. They were grabbed, sometimes carried, sometimes dragged. Young enough to be shaped. Old enough to be sold. Entire families were torn apart in minutes. Husbands never seeing their wives again. Parents losing their children forever. And as the ships pulled away from the shore, those left behind could only watch. Helpless. Because once the captives were taken to sea, they vanished from the world they knew. The journey itself was a test of survival. Captives were packed tightly into the ships. There was little space. Little food. Little water. Many were injured. Some were already dying. But there was no care, no mercy. If someone became too weak, they were often thrown overboard. A life discarded, without a second thought. Storms made everything worse. Waves crashing over the deck. Winds tearing at the sails. Captives struggling to stay alive, chained, helpless, soaked in freezing water. Some prayed. Some screamed. Some simply gave up. And when the ships finally reached land, those who survived faced a new horror. They were not going home. They were being delivered. Because across Europe and beyond, there existed a network. A system designed for one purpose. To buy and sell human lives. The Vikings were not just raiders. They were traders. And their most profitable trade was people. Captives were taken to markets far from their homeland. Places where no one spoke their language. Where no one knew their names. They stood in lines, waiting to be inspected. Examined like animals. Buyers looked at their teeth. Their muscles. Their age. Young and strong meant a higher price. Weak or sick meant little value. Families were split apart without hesitation. A mother sold one way. Her child another. A husband watching, powerless, as everything he loved was taken from him. And there was nothing he could do. Because in that moment, he was no longer a person. He was property. Some captives were bought for labor. They were sent to farms, forced to work from sunrise to sunset. Fields that never ended. Tasks that never stopped. Punishments that came quickly, and often. If they slowed down, they were beaten. If they resisted, they were killed. There were no rights. No protection. Only survival. Others were sent to harsher places. Mines. Construction sites. Work that broke the body. Work that many did not survive for long. And when they died, they were replaced. Because there was always another captive. Always another raid. But for many women, the suffering took a different form. They were taken into households. given to warriors or sold to wealthy buyers. Their roles were not chosen. Their lives were controlled. And their bodies were no longer their own. Some were forced into relationships, not by choice, but by power, by ownership. And refusal was not an option, because resistance brought punishment, and punishment was meant to break them. Some tried to escape. Few succeeded. Those who were caught often faced consequences so severe that others would never try again. Over time something changed, not outside, but inside. Captives began to lose pieces of themselves. Their language faded, replaced by new words. Their beliefs were stripped away, replaced by new customs. Their names forgotten, or replaced with ones given by their masters. They were no longer who they had been. They became something else, something shaped by survival. Some even rose within their new world. Trusted servants, skilled workers. But freedom was rare, and the memory of who they once were never truly disappeared, even if no one else remembered, even if history forgot. Because history tells the story of the Vikings as heroes, as explorers, as warriors who shaped the world. And while some of that is true, it is not the whole truth. Because behind every successful raid, there were voices that were silenced, lives that were erased, people who vanished, not into death, but into something far more cruel. A life where everything was taken from them. Their home, their family, their identity, everything. And the world moved on, as if they had never existed. But they did exist. In the shadows of history, in the quiet spaces between the stories, their suffering remains. A reminder that the Viking Age was not just an age of conquest. It was an age of captivity. And for many, the true horror was not the raid itself. It was what came after. A life without freedom. A life without choice. A life where every day was a reminder of everything they had lost. And perhaps the darkest truth of all is that most of their stories were never told. They were never written down, never remembered, because they were not the victors. They were the forgotten. And their silence